This is the Unstarving Musician podcast. I'm your host, Robonzo. The podcast features conversations with me, indie music artists, and industry professionals, and it's all intended to help other indie music artists be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for yet another episode of the Unstarving Musician. I appreciate you. I'm recording this intro from a beachfront condo in Mazatlan, Mexico, sans my normal recording gear. I'm actually using my iPhone for this part, which I did for last week's episode, the introduction for that episode featuring Amina. And I'm actually enjoying an ice-cold Modelo Especial. It's warm here. Sammy, the wife, and I arrived here Monday this week. Our trip started in Mexico City. A couple of weeks ago, actually, started in Mexico City. We have also visited the towns of Querétaro, Lake Chapala, and Ajijic. We'll finish our travels in Monterrey and back in Mexico City before returning to Panama. I hope to visit the town where my father was born, just outside of Monterrey. I became intrigued with the idea of doing this while reading a book that Sammy turned me on to. The Murmur of Bees. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Mazatlan, Ajijic, and Chapala are big expat areas, which is nice for some people, especially if you're not going to learn the local language. We've most enjoyed Querétaro so far on this trip, where one really does need to know Spanish. It's a beautiful place, college town, agriculture surrounding the historical district and suburbs. Really nice. My guest in this episode is Ryan Rosoff of the progressive metal-ish rock band Little King. They have a new album out called Amuse de Q, now streaming just about everywhere, including on their website, littlekingtunes.com. We also talk about his travels, growing up in Seattle, music as a career outside of a career, leaving a legacy, practice and meditation as motivation, TikTok, and more. He was really pleasant to talk to, and I, like a lot of people who have been on this podcast, I found him inspiring. He has a great outlook on his time on this planet and his music. I hope you too will find inspiration in our conversation. Okay, here is me and Ryan Rosoff of Little King.
Animal.
Every time someone brings that up, I'm like, I gotta go listen to that song again.
Like you've never heard it back before, I'll bet. Eh?
Uh-huh.
There it is, buddy.
Hey, look at you. Look like you're out in the desert. Where are you today?
I'm out in the desert.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, ish. My office in the desert. I live in Tucson now, so traveling around a lot. But this has been home for the last almost a year, really.
Okay. Where did you move from?
Delaware, baby. But from Delaware, before Delaware, I was in San Jose. So that's our little San Jose connection. I lived there I moved there in 2018 and then left right at the end of 2013. So I was in San Jose for about 5 years, but grew up in Seattle, went to school down here and in Texas. I've been all over the place, really.
Yeah. Where are you from originally?
Wait. Seattle is where I grew up.
Oh yeah. I was going to say, wait, I read this.
Yeah. I mean, I was born in Los Angeles. So my family's like an old school LA family. My grandparents moved there, I think, in like 1928. So they've been there a long time. My dad grew up there, but I was born there and I moved to Seattle, I guess, after he was military. He was a doctor, but he was in, Vietnam in 72 or whenever when I was born. So we moved from there to San Antonio, to Kansas. I lived in London for a couple of years when I was little, which probably had some effect on me somehow. And I've been told I sing in a British accent sometimes. It's like, well, hey, I did live there 2 years. That's my bona fide. So so that's the journey. But I lived most of my life in Seattle growing up, and then I lived in El Paso, Texas for about 15 years off and on, which is why all of my records have been made there. Most of the musicians that I've played with in the past, my buddies are down there too. So combination of a lot of different places around the United States, really.
Nice. Back when you formed your band or bands in El Paso, how was the abundance of good musicians there? I've never lived there. I'm from Dallas, Fort Worth, and there still are incredible number of great musicians there.
for sure. El Paso is fertile. I mean, especially for a city that's sort of undersold in terms of its artistic contributions.
Uh-huh.
It's an amazing place. I mean, and again, having lived in the Bay Area like you for a long time and growing up in Seattle, and then being in Austin all the time. Obviously, when you're a musician in Texas, Austin is one of the places that you tour and you play and you try and get a foothold in. But it's incredibly diverse in El Paso. There's a lot more. Obviously, there's influence coming across the border big time because it's a border city. But I've never lived or played in a city where there are more accomplished or better musicians, and they seem to be in it for the right reasons. There's not a lot of pie in the sky dreams about making out of El Paso and hit the big stage. And certainly there have been a few bands, Mars Volta originally, those two guys, Cedric and Omar,
Oh,
were
wow.
from at the drive-in, and so they're from El Paso, and Sparta is the other half of that, Jim Ward, and a few others have come out through the years. But I don't know, man, great players, lots of jazz, a lot of metal, a lot of dark metal coming out of there. So yeah, I mean, it's a city of only about 850,000, but super duper fertile for sure.
That's good to hear. Is
Yeah.
it safe to categorize most of your work as metal, or are you in some other sort of?
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. I think we're the least metal band out there. I mean, I sing, so there's not a lot of Cookie Monster, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So we don't do any of that. I mean, certainly half of the songs that I've, in the last 10 years that I've released, um, have a lot of acoustic guitar and sort of more, I wouldn't say ballad. I think if anything, the best nomenclature that I've heard attached to our band is dynamic rock, which I really like. I don't know if that's a thing or if that's a genre, but it is now, right?
Yeah.
So I try to make albums that are a little bit shorter. I love the 70s and I love 35 to 40-minute concepts.
Yeah.
I think, especially with a short attention span of the modern era, being able to get in and get out and make a statement within 30 minutes, which is what the new album is about 30 minutes long, is paramount. And so to me, having those dynamics built in, whether it's full on rock, very heavy kind of, aggressive, straightforward 4/4, or, ballady, atmospheric acoustic guitar. We even bring a lot of cello and violin again in this album, which we did a little bit last time, but even more so this time. If you could touch all those emotions and hit all those moods in the course of 30 minutes, I really think there's something for everybody, and it kind of keeps the flow going. I think it keeps people, letting it play to the next song and letting play the next song. It's like, oh my God, what is next? So there is no great categorization. Maybe there's a little a little prog in there. I'm certainly a huge Rush fan, and old Yes and Genesis and even Tool and some more modern stuff, Dream Theater a little bit. Um, we definitely dabble a lot in odd time signatures. I don't think in four. Most people don't think in four, even though maybe they've been conditioned to think that they do. So I mean, even in the new single, like I don't know if you had a chance to check out Keyboard Soldier, but that's a song that's coming out next week. That's our first album or first single and video. And there are literally passages in 3, 4, 5, 7, back to 4. There's a lot going on, but hopefully it's super accessible too. Like I love Rush, and what they were able to do so effectively throughout their career was be able to sneak those little odd times in there, but make them seamless and make it, unless you're a musician and you kind of knew what was going on, you knew what to listen for, you wouldn't necessarily notice that, hey, that feels a little odd or that feels a little herky jerky. So really try to kind of incorporate some of that ethos into our music too. And I think, as I go further and further, I get better and better at being able to do that. And I think Keyboard Soldier definitely is able to do that for sure.
Yeah, I probably have heard it. I was listening this morning to your 2019 release, and is it pronounced
Yeah.
Occam's Foil?
Occam's Foil. Yeah.
Occam's Foil.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I did check it out. I'll revisit it now that you made some. I like going back and after I talk to the artist, going back and listening with a different ear.
Yeah.
But well, I like that,
Yeah.
and I can see all those things that you said about your music. If I'd have given it a little more thought, I probably wouldn't have said metal. But yeah, I don't know why I said that, because really, when I talking to you about it and reflecting on what I've heard, it's a little more, if I was going to try and put it in an old label or put an old label on it, I'd probably say it's kind of prog meets
Alternative, maybe. I
modern
don't.
80s rock or something,
Yeah.
fast rock. Yeah.
And the Seattle influence there too. I mean, obviously, I grew up in Seattle in the 70s and the 80s, so I'm a little bit older than, you know, to have grown up with grunge. But certainly, 1990 rolled around, I was 18. And so, as you can see, I live in Tucson now, and I came down here first in 1990. So I graduated from high school up in, a suburb of Seattle in 1990, and came down here for college because I was just so sick of the clouds and the weather. I love Seattle, but the weather just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to go to school in Arizona and study creative writing down here. And of course, as soon as I came to Arizona, the whole Seattle scene exploded. Like literally, what, 6 months after? Nirvana
You
first.
could have made it.
I know, it was right there, but it was, so Nirvana first for sure. And we'd heard of Soundgarden. Soundgarden's a little older than some of those other bands. So as I was, in high school and starting to get serious about playing music, Soundgarden was just kind of bubbling up. And then, Nirvana blew the whole thing open. Then obviously Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Mudhoney before that a little bit. I mean, there was Candlebox. Actually, I went to school with a bass player, Candlebox. I went to high school with him. He's a few years older than me. But
were they from Seattle?
They are, yeah, they are. And Barty Martin is the bass player. He's from Mercer Island, which is where I grew up. So he actually is my brother's age. He, I think, was one of the bad kids. I don't think he finished regular high school, but he, I think, eventually straightened it out. He's doing fine now. But all those bands certainly have had some influence on me. I don't know. Like I said, I missed it by a little bit, but definitely a big Soundgarden and Alice in Chains fan in particular. So that sort of grungy feel to it, a little bit darker maybe. When you grow up in Seattle and it's cloudy 4 out of every 5 days, it sort of has
It is dark. It is dark, but it's more complex than what I would classify grunge. You kind of have this complex precision going on musically and melodically, and just the whole execution of the music from what I've listened to so far.
Yeah, and I think, I know you haven't heard the whole album yet. Obviously, it hasn't been released until September 3rd, but you have access to it. And if you don't, I'll certainly make sure that you do.
Oh, sure.
Have access to all the tracks. We do it like everybody else now. The tracks are available to people who are on the inside. You go to Google Drive, download, boom, there you go, and you have them. I think this is an extension of that in a few different ways. And first of all, this is my 7th release over the last 24 years. So first album came out in '97, and it was an album. It was really more of a demo than anything else. It kind of took on a life of its own. But through the years, I've always changed musicians. I mean, part of the reason I got into playing music and writing my own songs in the first place is I just really wanted to play with my friends and write stuff, but I couldn't rely on musicians having it together. And so I'm sort of a driver. I've always been kind of the one that wants to, like, hey guys, come on, let's go. So instead of relying on it and waiting for things together, I decided, okay, Little King's going to be my project, but what it's going to be is a collective of musicians that I get to play together with. So this album, Music Q, is the first time that I've ever kept a cohesive unit of musicians together. It's always been different players, every album to album, different combinations. But Manny Tejeda, who's my friend from Delaware, still lives back there, and then Eddie Garcia, who's a monster, by the way, as the drummer, also the engineer. He's engineered the last 5 records and played drums on the last 4. And he's the founder of Pissing Razors, which is a very popular metal band from Texas, also, and has been in that Dallas scene where you come from. They were very good friends with Pantera and used to play with Vinny and Dime and knew those guys pretty well.
How old is he?
Eddie is probably
yeah.
He's older than me.
I'm sorry I asked, but his name is familiar. He has a very common name, as do I. But
of course, yeah.
So he spent time in Dallas-Fort Worth when he was young.
He grew up in Fort Stockton, Texas, and then moved to El Paso when he was younger. But his band, Pissing Razors, again, they were very close to Pantera and knew Dime and Vinny very well and have toured extensively. He's played forever. So Eddie's probably 55, 54, something like that. I'm 49 and he's a few years older than me. So
I wonder if I knew him because I went to school with Rex, Daryl, and Vince from Pantera, and Rex and I actually were in our first band together right before he joined Pantera. But his name was so familiar.
He's sort of a legend in Texas, and I mean, not only that, he's played in. So he was he's a drummer, like I said, he's a beast. But he played bass in Ministry for a while. Ministry up in El Paso for a few years. So. For whatever reason, Al Jorgensen decided he loved El Paso and made a couple records at a studio out there called Sonic Ranch. And so Eddie joined that band and toured with them. And then he was the drummer for Overkill for a while too, which is sort of a metal, almost progressive. It's more like Anthrax, I would say, in Pantera a little bit. But, I mean, Eddie's played in 70 countries and's opened for Iron Maiden a bunch of times and Megadeth. And, he's really sort of a local kind of regional legend. So Eddie and Manny had played drums and bass on the last record, and they're with us again. They're with me again on this one. And I think that sort of through line, that cohesion really is audible on this one. Again, cello and bass, violin player as well, David and Christina, but having the same unit. And Oaklands Foil is only a year and change old, so it isn't that long ago that we made that record. So I think there was that kind of that confidence and that flow and knowing what we did last time and hearing the things that we really loved about the last record, but also understanding that there was some growth that was possible. The anticipation, what other people's parts are going to be like. Obviously, we were writing during the pandemic. So there was a lot of sending of files and sending of videos back and forth. Not so much between Eddie. Eddie's really kind of the end piece of that, but between Manny and I, even living in the same city in Delaware, we weren't able to see each other for a few months. And so I was writing a record. I'm sitting there on my bed watching, CNN or MSNBC or whatever, and watching the world totally disintegrate. I'm like, gosh, there's not going to be any touring this year in 2020. And we were ready to go. Like the last record was doing really well. People liked it. And we had a lot of interest from festivals and had already booked quite a few things. And then of course, it imploded on itself. So I had to make a record or, not, I guess, but I decided, I just started writing, and I had this old classical guitar, this beat up guitar that I was writing all these, rock songs on. So that process and sending the files and sending tracks back and forth and getting some ideas was definitely a different way of writing. But because we'd already just been together, previously 6 months prior to me starting to write, I think it was a lot easier process this time coming in the studio and anticipating what the other person was, was going to end up doing.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is you've been doing this a long time, and I've been playing music for a long time, but you've definitely, you've been doing original music for a long time. I just started. I started arguably in the pandemic age, so I know, and I always kind of, somehow I always kind of knew I would be recording from a home studio at some point, and I kind of dragged my feet for a long time. But I did want to ask you what, in a couple of different ways, what has motivated and what has enabled you to be doing this for as many years as you have, to do 7 albums, you were just looking forward to a tour. And I know you're probably thinking, well, if they come back, we'll do it in 2022 or 2023, whatever the case may be. What has motivated and enabled you to do both of those things for the amount of time with such enthusiasm too, apparently?
Yeah. And I am enthusiastic about life. I think it's a blessing. I wake up pretty stoked every day for the most part, which I feel lucky about, right? I know a lot of people that aren't so stoked to be awake. And so it's just, I'm not a religious person. I guess I'm a spiritual person, but I wake up every day and like, yeah, here we go again. And this helps too, right? Definitely, like the coffee helps.
Yeah.
I would say, in terms of motivation, I've always been sort of focused on leaving a legacy. And I don't know that there's ever been a generation before ours that's had the ability, in terms of recording equipment or in terms of just the sustainability of being able to have a career outside of a career, which is really what I consider music to be. But I've always wanted to leave a legacy, and I even made a record in 2008 called Legacy of Fools, which, is a poke at myself, of course, because if you don't have a self-deprecating sense of humor, then what do you have? So Legacy of Fools was really my sort of take on how, what we are leaving behind as a society, what I'm leaving behind personally, and sort of willfully doing it or subconsciously. And so all the songs kind of relate directly or indirectly to a legacy. So I think the motivation to make an album after an album after an album and always trying to improve it. Making a record there's so many moving parts, as to making an album, whether it's the artwork or whether it's the lyrics, whether it's the music or the production or the mixing and the mastering and any engineering tricks, what guitars, what tones, what amps, what effects you're using, how you're gonna bring in strings this time and last time and arrange those. It really satisfies both sides of my brain. Again, a huge Rush fan, and Hemispheres was their album from '78 that made had a big impact on me. Basically the left brain and the right brain and how they kind of cohere or they're cohesive at the end of that, the end of that record. And so making a record is left brain because there's so much of the mechanics of it and the even, writing songs, the meter and having things make sense in terms of phrasing and in terms of structure. So the left brain is really satisfied in the process of making an album, as is the right brain, because that's the creative side. That's, what's bringing sort of the aesthetic to it. So the motivation to me is leaving a legacy and just the fun of it, the creativity, the things that go into it, all the moving parts. And then that feeling of finally getting that CD back, in the mail before it's been released, sitting in your car, plug it into your system, have the EQ set exactly the way you want it. I've done that 7 times in my life now. And it's a phenomenal feeling. And I think it kind of keeps coming me back. In terms of enabling, I've always had, another career. So I was a high school teacher in Texas for a while. I've owned a corporate team building company for the last 10 years. So I'm able to sort of simultaneously be able to juggle these things. I'm a single parent too. I have a 14-year-old son and now a 24-year-old daughter, but she was 0 when I made my first record. So having a career and having a source of income to enable me to be able to make records without having to rely on a label, which I've done a couple times and never went quite as I wanted it to. I've been enabled by having the financial support to be able to do it for my own career, as well as, having the studio in Texas where Eddie and I can record and make albums and have access to amazing musicians. So the cost of recording obviously has changed dramatically from 1997 to now. It was expensive to make a record. I mean, never mind the 70s, when Fleetwood Mac was spending 3 million or whatever they were spending to make Rumors. Now, you can theoretically, make a really great sounding record for about $5,000, recorded, mixed, mastered, even less, in some cases. So I think technology has changed to the point where it's enabled me to really do what it is that I need to do. The motivation's hard. Sometimes I really have to kind of sit down and focus myself to do it. But, to the beginning of my answer, there's the big picture of wanting to create this legacy and have something that, my kids, maybe in the year 2112, like who knows, in honor of Rush, maybe they'll be able to sit back and say, okay, that was my crazy ass bald great grandpa. He was an interesting dude. Let's hear what he had to say. And then, they press play and there it is. And that's fascinating to me. Maybe it's a little piece of immortality that otherwise would be elusive.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I worry about this with the podcast because podcast hosting is kind of an ongoing thing. And I thought, well, when I'm dead and gone, probably just cancel that hosting account, right?
Yeah.
And that'll be the end of that. But
it'll live forever.
Yeah. But what about the motivation piece that you said is hard? What's the challenging part for you, and how do you overcome?
Yeah, life and truths. I don't make music necessarily for a living. I have through different points in my life, and we're moving in that direction again. But when you're juggling kids and you're juggling a career and just the day-to-day operations of, being the head of a household or, owning a home or, wanting to travel, I'm very much vested in my kids and their education and their upbringing. So sometimes life just kind of beats you down and takes you away from what your prime motivations, what you want them to be.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily wait for the muse to hit me to say it's time, to make a record. I really kind of sit down and say, hey, it's time to make a record. Where am I going to draw my motivation and my inspiration from? So it's not always easy because you're just juggling so many things. If I didn't have other, adult responsibilities, I'd be kicking out an album a year for the rest of my life, because when I sit down, I say it's time to write. There's so many external influences and internal in my life, but external in the world, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's elections or whether it's, whatever political atmosphere, environment, protest, Black Lives Matter movement, all the things that have been burning in my country, in our country for the last year. It's easy to find inspiration. It's just sometimes when there's so many other things going around and it's not maybe necessarily financially prudent at a particular point in time to make a record, those are the things. But when it's time and I know it's time and I sit down and I focus, all the music comes first, all the lyrics come second. But at that point, then it's not a problem. It's just dealing with the day-to-day of being an adult human being with other responsibilities, I would say.
Yeah. I would imagine, given your life and your time here on this plane, that you're a little like me, and that like, well, I only have so much time, or I don't have that much time. So
I mean, I made a record. So my second record was 1998. It was an album called Time Extension. And it was very ambitious, to say the least. I listened back to it. About half of it for me is listenable personally. The other half of it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's adorable. Those first couple efforts they're very cute. But the funny thing, the reason I bring that up is that, even at age 25, when I was writing those words and writing the lyrics, I mean, basically it's a concept album about a guy on his deathbed, and he's reflecting back on all the different points in his life as he's on his deathbed where he would go back and maybe change something. And so he's granted a time extension, and that's the theme of the album. So it really is very linear in terms of being a concept album. And even at age 25, I was so acutely aware of the passage of time and what a gift it was and how many things I wanted to do and see and accomplish, and knowing that we had such a finite amount of time to be able to make it happen. So even, half of my life ago, literally, which is what that was, I was aware of it. And so, yes, there is this, this feeling of the crush of time and wanting to have all those things packed in. So what is it you're going to do? What is it I'm going to do to make the most use of it? Well, I've dialed it into the things that bring me the most pleasure, that seem to be the most productive, the things that keep me out of trouble, which I have a penchant for getting in trouble, my friend, at least I used to. You can see the gleam in my eye, it's real. But I've passed all that. I'm in a good place in my life now where I'm sober and I'm sane and I've always been productive, but I feel good. So for me now, I mean, that was my half my life ago. I can't believe that was 24 years ago, or 23 years ago, I was sitting in the studio doing that. And so, yeah, what are you going to do? How are you going to pack it all in? And how are you going to appreciate it and slow those moments down a little bit so that time does, because we have control over that. Time is relative in terms of how it passes, in terms of how we approach it. Yeah, okay, there are so many hours and days and weeks and months, but how do we spend that time? And so for me, I'm spending that time at this point being creative, talking about music, enabling my friends and helping other musicians kind of reach their goals. Because I, as we talked about offline a little bit, I had a career in music outside of just being the artist for a long time and continue to consult for artists as well. So that's the passage of time to me. But yeah, even at 24, I was like, oh my God, it's going so quickly. And the spirals get smaller and smaller, right? Like a year to me, you and I are probably close to the same age. A year to me is now 1/49th of my life. A year to me, in when you're in elementary school, it's 1/7 of your life. So literally that passage of time is a relative equation. Of course, a year is going to be pass more quickly to you and me because it's relative to what we've experienced. That's why, when you're 5 or 7 years old, the summer seems to last forever, because it's literally, if you're 5 years old, the summer is 3 months, is 1/20th of your life. Well, now to you and me, it goes in the blink of an eye. And imagine what's going to be like when we're in our 70s and 80s. It's like, what happened? So I was aware of that then. I'm certainly more aware of it now. So that's kind of how I deal with it, is just continue to be as productive as I possibly can be.
Well, I think you probably gave some of the answer to this question, but maybe you can elaborate on it a bit. How do you go about slowing the moments down?
Yeah, my favorite Rush song is a weird one. It's
Which
Time
one?
Stand Still, which was 1987, very weird era for them. Super duper keyboardy and kind of slickly produced. It was that, mid to late 80s kind of production. And the album, Hold Your Fire is that album, and it gets a lot of criticism, probably rightly so in a lot of ways. But that song in particular stands out to me because he's just talking about, the innocence slips away, experience slips away. If I could slow it all down, like some captain whose ship runs aground, I could wait until the tide comes around. That moved me again, even at age 15. So how do I go about doing it? Well, first of all, gratitude. Gratitude for the time that we've been given and for the miracle of life. And for the privileges that I've been granted in my life in terms of my upbringing and the way I've been able to facilitate all of the beautiful things and the great things in my life. Gratitude is first. Being grateful for the moments. It's really easy to get caught up and sucked up in the day to day and not have that gratitude for the little things. So I start from a place of acceptance and gratitude. And then it's practice, it's meditation, really. It's ongoing meditation. It's not necessarily sitting down in lotus and going, it's more just having that mechanism to be able to stop yourself in the middle of something crazy, or in the middle of something wonderful, or in the middle of grief, or whatever it is, and be able to say, okay, this is a blessing. Let's slow it down. Let's really soak up the essence of what it is that's happening at any given moment, like sitting in your car for the first time when the CDs come back from disc makers in the mail, or doing a podcast with my new buddy down in Panama, or whatever it is. That's beauty to me. And if I can slow those things down and really, as much as possible by practice and by training, have appreciation for those moments, then that's a win to me. That's really what I want. And so we know this, you and I know this, we're enlightened to it, but how do we practice it? And that's the key. And it's ongoing. Nobody's perfect at it, but I'm certainly, I think, much further along, than I was, say, even maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So how do you do it? Practice, man. It's like anything. It's like learning a guitar or singing new scales or whatever it is. I think it's practice.
It's true. And it's really nice to hear your perspective on it. Anytime I ask someone who gives an answer even remotely like yours, it's like, I don't know if it's reinforcing, but it literally sort of feels like I'm learning something, even though seldom is the concept that gets brought to my attention in these conversations new, but I think just the reminders, they feel new, right? They make you feel good. I have to ask you, in a little bit of time we have left too, about your time as a publicist and in the A&R biz. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how that molded your approach to music, and in a way, if you can, that helps other musicians to think about, maybe they don't have the experience that you do, a lot of us don't, but like it might help them sort of think a little differently?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's something I love to talk about because, again, I've been blessed with a unique opportunity to really see music from all sides of it, from recording, from the actual technical side of it, as well as the promotion and the pimping of it, as I like to say. And as a former professional pimp, the first thing is that don't create music because you think you're going to get somewhere with it. create music only because you get massive amounts of appreciation and joy out of it. If you're getting into it solely for a career, that's a rat race. And honestly, to be as successful as our heroes are in this business, that's a winning lottery ticket. And there's a lot more good that goes into it in a lottery. Lottery is just chance. There's a lot of dominoes that have to fall over. Um, I went backwards. I was a musician first, and I was having some success promoting myself and promoting my records, primarily because I was pretty aggressive and pretty organized in terms of my promotion. This is the '90s, late '90s, before that was dial-up, as you well remember. It wasn't really, it wasn't so rapid as it is now. There's no social media, so I mean, we were literally paper flying cars and sending out massive press kits and doing the whole thing. And then, for the first couple albums, really until Virus Divine came out in 2003. So I think people were paying attention and saying like, gosh, this guy, I may or may not like his music, but he sure is out there a lot. He sure is touring a lot. He sure is getting a lot of press and some radio play. So how's he doing it? So people started to come to me, and I realized, oh my gosh, maybe I do have a gift to be able to help some of these guys find their way. So it just evolved into that. So I learned from the standpoint of publicity and from radio promotion and booking exhaustive tours, which is the absolute worst job in the whole business is as a booking agent. It sucks. It's the one thing I just refuse to do for myself anymore. I will hire other people always to do that. What I learned again is, the motivations behind doing it. Make sure that you're in it for the purest and most, righteous reasons, which is to create your art and then share it with other people. If you love what you do, it doesn't matter kind of whatever anybody else thinks. I really don't give a rat's ass what people think about my music. If they like it, great. There's a lot of music that sells tons that I can't stand, that I would never, I would never put into my earbuds. So I'm totally at peace and acceptance with my music not being for everybody. That's okay. So I think I'm in it for the right reasons. The other thing is, in terms of your promotion, there are a lot of black holes of money. Whether it's buying Facebook ads or Google ads or Instagram, or there's a lot of time sucks and a lot of money sucks. Everybody's different. Everybody has different mechanisms for being able to get their music out. I think the thing is try a lot of different things, talk to a lot of different people that are in the same position as you are now and as I am, which is as independent artists. Where are we spending our dollars? Where are we throwing our money? And really, get a sense of what's working for other people. The landscape has changed so rapidly, even in the last couple of years. I mean, I have a TikTok account at Little King Tunes 1. And, I never in a million years, my friend, that's for my kids, right? That's for my teenage son is 14. I mean, they use TikTok, but, just in the last few weeks of starting to post some little 15-second videos on TikTok, I'm getting 600, 700 views, in the space of a couple hours. Well, that's reaching somebody.
Yeah.
That's somehow working. It's hard to get 600 to 700 views for one of my videos on Facebook or Instagram. So all of a sudden, being open to it, not saying, oh, I'm never going to use TikTok. I'm like, okay, let's check it out. All of a sudden, I posted a video last night and it's just a stupid video of me clowning in my bedroom, with a guitar. All of a sudden, I wake up, there's 700, 800 views on it. So I think, being open, talking to a lot of people consistently, getting some feedback and trying, putting your finger, put your foot in the stream, put your foot in that stream, stick in this bathtub. And over time, I think you find what works for you. I think what works for you and works for me may not work for a teenage hip hop artist, but you really never know. You really never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Never underestimate the things you haven't tried, right?
Oh my gosh. And I mean, there's so many things that you and I mean, even after 25 years in this business of being independent, I still so many things that I'm learning. I have a publicist up in Seattle. He's about the same age as me. His name's Chris Esty, and he's worked for Sub Pop Records in the 90s in Seattle. And so he's about the same age. We kind of grew up in the same place and sort of came together by happenstance. But I talked to him about his experience, since the early 90s of working for Nirvana and those guys. And oh my God, think about how much that guy has seen. And I mean, his thing is be humble to all of it because you don't know anything. And I'm okay with that. The humility, I think maybe Roberto is the biggest piece of all of this, is just the humility in the face of the things that we don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And last question, what's the most unexpected to me or listeners music that you listen to?
I'm a major, massive 90s hip hop fan. And as a matter of fact, when I started my publicity business, I did about 70% hip hop, about 20% rock, and maybe about 10% jazz. So I was very diverse at the beginning, but it was mostly hip hop. And I have, I probably play more hip hop and reggae than I do rock in my house. And in particular, like I'm a big Tupac, Biggie, NWA, Dre, Cube, Snoop. I love that West Coast dirty stuff, from the early 90s. So yeah, I mean, I pretty much have every single Snoop album, Dre album, and some of the more obscure stuff too, like even modern, like Chance and, Tyler the Creator and things like that. Like I really listen to a lot more hip hop than probably most people who make quasi prog rock records do.
That's cool to hear. I need to ask that question more often. I don't think I ever ask it, but for some reason I wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Ryan, thank you so much for making time with me today. And lest I forget to say it in the intro that I record later, littlekingtunes.com is where people can find out about everything you're doing. You've got links to all the good stuff there and a lot of music and video stuff there. It's a real pleasure, man. And we'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Pleasure's mine, my friend. Thank you for reaching out to us. And I'll definitely be talking to you down the road.
Yeah, cheers, man.
Take care. You too.
I recently asked over 50 podcasters the following question. What's the number one reason that the startup of your podcast was delayed? Among the most common themes in their responses were fear, procrastination, and tech. What if I told you it doesn't have to be so hard? What if I gave you the confidence and tools you needed to start your podcast today? If you want to share expertise, dig deep into a special interest, help others, get more people to visit your blog, expand your personal brand, grow your network, then podcasting might be for you, and this course might be for you. Podcast Startup covers tech, which includes gear and software, hosting, editing, format options, marketing, and more. To learn more about this course created by yours truly and the Unstarving Musician, just go to unstarvingmusician.com/podcast startup. This episode was powered by Bandzoogle, the platform for musicians and bands to build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle features powerful design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, and tickets, detailed fan data, integrations with social networks, and more. Plans start at just $8.29 a month, which includes a free custom domain name. Try it at bandzoogle.com and use the promo code Robonzo, ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Robonzo. This episode is also powered by ConvertKit. Remember the old days of collecting email addresses at the merch table with a notebook and pen? Now that notebook has gone digital, so you can promote your music everywhere and keep fans both old and new in the know. And you can do it with ConvertKit. Use landing pages designed for musicians to create an easy way to promote your next album, embed your music videos, and link out to social platforms and places to download music. Don't rent your audience, own it with an email list. Visit unstarvingmusician.com/convert to create your free account today. You'll be supporting the podcast in the process. Did you know you can help other independent artists find this podcast by subscribing on Apple Podcast or wherever you are listening to your podcast these days? It really does help, so I hope you will consider it. The Unstarving Musician podcast is made possible through the support and generosity of listeners like you. One of the easiest ways to support the podcast, if you're a musician, is to join the Unstarving Musician community, which you can do at, you guessed it, unstarvingmusician.com. In joining the community, you get tips and insights you can use in your music journey that comes not only from me and my years of experience, but also from the hundreds of other musicians that I speak to as part of the Unstarving Musician project and podcast. Plus, you'll get a free copy of my Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs ebook, the official version, and that's all for free just for being part of the community. You can learn about other ways of offering support by visiting the Unstarving Musician crowd sponsor page at unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor. And if you have feedback, please go to unstarvingmusician.com to get all my contact info. You can text me, call me, email me, leave a voice message right there on that page. Just go down to the bottom of the page and you'll find everything you need to know. I really would love to hear any of your comments, suggestions, questions, whatever you've got. And you can find links to just about everything talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. All right, I'm peacing out. Thank you for listening and sharing with your musician friends and fellow indie music bands. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love.